The first thing the young soldiers noticed was the little boy holding his father's hand. The second thing they noticed was the faded work jacket, the cheap boots, and the exhausted face of a man who looked like he had spent more time repairing broken machines than commanding soldiers. They laughed when he stepped onto the military training field. But within hours, every one of them would stand silent, because the single father they had mocked was about to accomplish something none of them could explain. And when the general finally saw the tattoo hidden beneath that man's sleeve, his entire expression changed. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change a person's life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel so our community can keep bringing you stories that remind us never to judge a person by appearances. The man was named Everett Hale, 38 years old, a widower and father to an 8-year-old son named Callum. Everett had once been the kind of man who could run for miles without slowing down, carry heavy equipment through freezing rain, and stay awake for days when duty demanded it. But that was years ago. Now his hands were rough from repairing engines at a small garage outside town, his shoulders were permanently stiff from an old injury, and his greatest responsibility was no longer a unit of soldiers. It was a little boy who still kept his mother's photograph beside his bed and sometimes asked his father questions Everett did not know how to answer. Since his wife's death, Everett had built his entire life around Callum. He worked early mornings, packed his son's lunch, fixed cars during the day, helped with homework in the afternoon, and somehow found the strength to smile even when exhaustion made his eyes burn. That morning, Everett had brought Callum with him because there was no one else available to watch him. The military base was hosting a public veteran skills assessment, and Everett had been invited to participate after a former instructor recommended him. He wasn't looking for glory. He wasn't trying to become a soldier again. He needed the prize money to repair the garage roof before winter and pay several overdue bills. More importantly, he wanted Callum to see that losing everything did not mean giving up. He wanted his son to understand that a person could be knocked down without becoming broken. When Everett walked onto the field, a group of young recruits were already waiting. They were strong, confident, and dressed in spotless training uniforms. Their names were Grayson Pike, Colton Reeves, Mason Bell, and Trent Hollis. They had spent months training together, and their confidence had slowly turned into arrogance. When they saw Everett standing there in an old jacket, one of them glanced at his worn boots and smirked. Another looked at Callum and jokingly wondered if the competition had become a family picnic. Everett heard them but said nothing. He simply squeezed his son's hand and told him to stay near the spectator area. The first test was a timed obstacle course. The recruits sprinted across the field, climbed barriers, crawled beneath wire, carried weighted bags, and crossed a narrow balance beam. Everett waited until the others had finished preparing. Then he stepped forward. His movements were not flashy. He didn't waste energy. He studied every obstacle for a few seconds, then moved with the quiet precision of someone who had done this before. He climbed, crawled, lifted, jumped, and turned with remarkable efficiency. By the time the final stopwatch stopped, Everett had beaten every recruit by several seconds. The laughter disappeared. Grayson looked at the scoreboard as if someone had made a mistake. Everett simply walked over to Callum, accepted a bottle of water, and sat beside him. His son looked proud, but Everett reminded him not to brag. He explained that being good at something did not make you better than another person. Callum nodded, and those words stayed with one of the recruits who had mocked him. The next test involved carrying a heavy rescue dummy across a long stretch of uneven ground. This time the recruits were determined to beat him. Colton went first and pushed himself so hard that he nearly stumbled at the halfway point. Everett watched carefully. When his turn came, he lifted the dummy, adjusted his grip, and began moving. Halfway across, he noticed another participant had twisted an ankle. Everett stopped his own attempt, helped the injured man sit safely, and only then continued. The officials expected him to lose precious seconds, but even with the delay, he still finished first. Grayson could not understand it. He had spent years training for moments like this. Everett had spent years repairing transmissions and changing tires. Yet the mechanic was beating men half his age. The third test was not physical. It was a field navigation exercise where each participant had to study a map, identify a safe route, and locate 3 markers hidden across a large training area. The recruits rushed ahead, confident in their knowledge. Everett stayed still for nearly a minute, studying the terrain. Then he pointed out that the obvious route crossed a section that had recently been marked unstable. The instructors checked his observation and discovered he was right. Everett chose a longer path and still reached all 3 markers before anyone else. By lunch, the recruits had stopped laughing. Callum sat beneath a tree eating a sandwich while Everett joined him. The boy asked why the soldiers had been mean to him. Everett looked across the field before answering. He told his son that sometimes people make fun of what they do not understand because admitting they are uncertain makes them feel weak. He told Callum never to return cruelty with cruelty. Then he added something his wife had once told him: the strongest person in the room is often the one who has nothing to prove. What Everett didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire morning from the far side of the field. General Malcolm Vane had arrived earlier than expected. He was a decorated senior officer with decades of service behind him, and he rarely showed emotion during training exercises. But the moment his eyes settled on Everett, something about the man's posture caught his attention. It wasn't the speed or strength. It was the way Everett looked at the field, the way his eyes constantly measured exits, distances, hazards, and people. It was the instinct of someone who had once been trained to notice danger before anyone else did. The final test was announced after lunch. It was designed to measure leadership under pressure. Participants would be divided into small teams and given a simulated emergency involving a damaged vehicle, an injured person, limited equipment, and a strict time limit. The recruits expected Everett to fail because leadership required more than physical strength. Grayson was assigned to Everett's team. For the first few minutes, Grayson tried to take control. He ordered everyone around and moved quickly without checking the situation. Everett watched quietly until he noticed a structural weakness in the simulated wreckage. If they moved the vehicle incorrectly, the injured mannequin underneath could be damaged further. Everett stopped the team and reorganized the entire operation. He assigned tasks according to each person's strengths, checked the equipment, and created a safe sequence for the rescue. For the first time, Grayson listened. They completed the rescue faster than any other team. When the exercise ended, the field was almost silent. Everett's score was the highest of the entire day. The officials began discussing his results while the recruits stood nearby. Grayson approached Everett slowly. The arrogance had disappeared from his face. He apologized for mocking him earlier. Everett accepted the apology without making him feel smaller. He told Grayson that everyone had bad moments and that what mattered was what a person did after recognizing one. Then General Vane walked toward them. Everett immediately straightened. The general studied him for several seconds and asked him to roll up his left sleeve. Everett hesitated. Callum looked up from his seat. Slowly, Everett pulled the sleeve above his elbow. Beneath it was a faded tattoo, partly hidden by scars. It showed a black mountain, a compass, and a small series of numbers. General Vane froze. The recruits looked confused. The general stepped closer, his face suddenly carrying an emotion nobody had seen from him all day. He recognized the tattoo immediately. It belonged to an elite rescue unit that had been nearly wiped out during a classified overseas operation years earlier. The numbers were not decorative. They represented the coordinates of a rescue mission that had saved several trapped soldiers. Everett had been one of the men who went back. Years earlier, he had served under General Vane when Vane was still a colonel. During a disastrous extraction, Everett had ignored orders to retreat because several wounded soldiers remained behind. He returned through dangerous terrain, carried 2 injured men to safety, and stayed behind long enough for the rest of the team to escape. Everett survived, but the injuries he suffered ended his military career. The general had spent years believing Everett had been among those lost after the mission. But Everett had never told anyone the full story. He had left the service quietly, married his childhood friend, and built a peaceful life. When his wife died years later, he became a single father. He never spoke about his military past because he didn't want Callum growing up believing his father was some kind of hero. Everett wanted his son to know him simply as Dad. General Vane looked at him and finally understood why the man had seemed familiar. The tattoo had answered the question. The young soldiers stood in stunned silence. Grayson remembered every insult from that morning. The old boots. The work jacket. The little boy. The laughter. All of it suddenly felt shameful. General Vane told the recruits that the man standing before them had once carried wounded soldiers when he was barely older than they were. But then he said something that surprised everyone. He told them Everett's greatest achievement wasn't what he had done in uniform. It was what he had done after leaving it. He had raised a child alone. He had worked honestly when nobody applauded. He had rebuilt his life after losing the person he loved. He had walked onto that field without demanding respect and earned it without asking for it. Everett looked uncomfortable with the attention. He only wanted the prize money and a chance to keep his garage open. General Vane quietly told him that the military had a civilian leadership program for veterans who wanted to train young recruits, and he believed Everett could teach them something no textbook could. Everett looked toward Callum. The boy was smiling. For years, Everett had worried that his son would remember only the difficult parts of their life. The empty chair at the dinner table. The bills on the counter. The days when Everett was too tired to play. But standing there, he realized Callum had also witnessed something important. He had seen his father keep going. Everett eventually accepted the offer, but only on one condition: his schedule had to allow him to remain present for his son. General Vane agreed. Months later, Everett's life had changed. He still worked at the garage, but he also trained young service members in leadership, rescue awareness, humility, and decision-making. The recruits who once laughed at him became some of his strongest supporters. Grayson, in particular, never forgot that first day. He became more patient, more observant, and more willing to listen. Whenever a new recruit arrived with confidence but little humility, Grayson would tell them about the single father who walked onto a military field in worn boots and quietly defeated every test. One afternoon, after a training session, Callum ran across the field and hugged his father. Everett lifted him into his arms, laughing as the boy told him he had finally beaten his school running record. The recruits watched from a distance. No one laughed anymore. They understood now that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes strength looked like a tired father showing up for his child. Sometimes courage looked like admitting you were wrong. Sometimes heroism had nothing to do with medals, uniforms, or recognition. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks is carrying a story powerful enough to change everyone around him. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before you go, leave a meaningful comment telling us this: what do you think makes someone truly strong, winning, surviving hardship, or choosing kindness when nobody expects it? Because Everett Hale's story left everyone with one unforgettable lesson: never judge a person by the clothes they wear, the work they do, or the scars they hide. You may be looking at someone who has already survived battles you know nothing about. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room isn't weak at all. Sometimes, they're simply tired of proving what they've already survived. And when the young soldiers finally understood that, they realized the greatest test Everett had passed that day wasn't the obstacle course, the rescue drill, or the leadership challenge. It was the test of character. He had been mocked, underestimated, and judged, yet he answered every insult with patience, every challenge with courage, and every opportunity with humility. That was the tattoo General Vane truly recognized, not the ink on Everett's arm, but the invisible mark left by a lifetime of sacrifice. Everett didn't walk away from that field as a legend. He walked away as a father holding his son's hand. And somehow, that made him more of a hero than he had ever been before.